Hello everyone, welcome to the first of many, or maybe even few, Cocoa Talks, where I have just drunk a nice cup of cocoa and I have this warm and fuzzy feeling in my stomach and I want to discuss something with all of you. Today I want to talk about the newest development vaults released by Hopo Games. This is the 18th and it was released on the 12th of September. This one focuses on the future of Risk of Rain 2 now that it has come out of early access, but also talks a bit about how the process of developing a game in early access has been. Now they start off by, talking about that they're going to get 1.0 on consoles and that they're, had done some retrospections and they have made this post-mortem of early access. Now I'm a really big fan of video game post-mortems, especially the one made for Darkest Dungeon over on GDC. I think it's one of the more interesting development procedures for a game and I highly recommend anyone to watch it. Now here they talk about how in the early access they thought it would, some would be curious to see the whole process and, they thought right. I always really like the transparency of Hopo. I think it's very, very interesting to learn how, the sausage is made, as one would put it. It's why, those pocket watches that are transparent are really neat. You can see every cog moving and I think those are just really cool. Now at first they list the positives of early access. They talk that it's a fantastic way to get feedback, which I very much agree with. It's been really incredible seeing that whenever there was a big issue with the game, like a bug or something that's hindering the quality of it, Hopo would really quickly put out a patch that would make it, playable and good again. They would fix it really quickly. The most recent example I suppose is when you were marooned on the island in the final stage on the 1.0 launch. Within a day I think they managed to fix it. I think that is just a really good sign and a great part of being in early access. I think the only time this wasn't true was in the start of the early access procedure when we had the problem with the director not spawning enemies when you got too far into the game, because it didn't spawn enemies that it thought was too easy for you, so it just, it wouldn't spawn a Lemurian when you one-shotting wandering vagrants. The director rather thought that overloading maggoworms would at one point, be too easy for you, so it wouldn't spawn anything. But there's nothing harder in the game than overloading maggoworm, so it just wouldn't spawn anything. And also it was the problem with the the blazing stone titan that did 25 fire procs on one laser tick and just melted you instantly. They waited a bit to fix that, which I know plenty of people were a bit upset with. At the same time, I do actually really like the incredibly overpowered Stone Titan. I don't think it's a great design or anything. It was an unintentional feature for a reason. But there's not been anything in the game that has inspired such a feeling of dread and fear whenever something like that spawned. They also talk about how it could, spread news of the game, which, they did really well in the Discord especially. I remember how whenever there was a big update coming or a content update, they would do these countdowns and people just went nuts. Everyone was so excited to see the new content. They could spread news and they could keep the hype going for quite a long time despite, the updates. They were frequent. They were quite frequent for a game like this, but they were still not, weekly or anything that would, make it so people would have constant interest, but they managed to keep people always engaged with the game. And of course, they themselves could engage with the players. They had a lot of open sources to take feedback in, to chat with players. And also, they were very down to earth. So no one really flipped out that much whenever a developer talked. And I think that's really good. It actively combats the horrible nature that is developer worship. And I am really glad to see that Hopo would even sometimes play random quick match games with the players or their players whenever there was a new update, and I just think that's really cool. It makes you, stay in touch for the people you make games for. It probably is a very good thing for your mentality. Unless those people start acting up really badly, then I suppose you might get a bit jaded. Now they also list some downsides. They talk about that it came at a cost of creativity and quality because they have to meet deadlines. Now I don't mention it here, but I also think quantity is a problem with the early access model. Because they had to constantly keep the interest for the game, they couldn't really make these massive grandiose updates because that would take too long. And I think the cost of creativity and quality wasn't really apparent in the beginning. I think in Scorched Acres and Skills 2.0, the Growth Hunter was a really unique and cool boss. Scorched Acres are a very different map. the Rex as a survivor, or can't even call them survivors, invaders maybe would be more fitting, was still rather unique and very different from the rest of the cast, and I think there was still a lot of creativity behind it all. I mean, Rex, the whole concept of Rex being half a plant or a gardening bot that is, you know, dedicated and sworn to protect its host, or rather the plant it's caring for, is incredibly inspired, and I'm really a big fan of Rex. Same in Skills 2.0, where the character of Loader was incredibly interesting and different and very fun. It inspired a lot of, you know, moments that were very memorable for players, where you would swing around the entire map, you would have such great amount of speed and just do a tremendous amount of damage with the gauntlet. In addition, people felt, you know, a very big connection to their characters or strivers that they played a lot, that they quote-unquote mained. And so seeing that they would get new skills that you could tinker around with was very exciting. I think this stands as one of the better updates. Siren's Call is an incredibly well-made map, not just aesthetically and theming-wise. Being a ship scrapyard is very cool, and I think the aesthetic is just very awe-dropping the first time you see it. It's managed to nail that Risk of Rain mood that I think was a bit missing from the first game. Or rather, that was missing in the second game, that was plenty in the first. And of course, the map had such a level of verticality, but you still had these claustrophobic tunnels and all these props and cover. It was just a very fun map. I think it's my favorite map in general of all time, in Risk of Rain at least. But then, you know, of course, the Souls control unit's very... I mean, the ally worship unit was maybe a bit of a bullet sponge, but they were still very interesting, and the way they, you know, messed with full damage was a very different take on having a super move. In Realms, you know, here I think we start to see where the creativity and quality part also, not only it starts to fall a bit, but also the quantity part. You know, you got Acrid, but also the Void Realms, I don't think they had to be 9 cycles long. I think you would have gotten a very similar experience with just 5 even, maybe 6. It feels a bit padded out to make it feel that it is more than what it really is. And, you know, it's in the first time it is incredibly tense and very exciting to not knowing what's gonna come next, and you really want to get to the end of it. But at some point, you know, doing reruns of it gets incredibly tedious. I think it's the worst part. The Void Realms are probably my least favorite part of the game at the moment. It just feels very much like a slog. It does get a bit more exciting if you do it after you've looped like 5 times and you just obliterate everything there. I think that is at least a bit interesting. Also the fact that they made it time stop there, which I guess does make canonical sense, just made it a bit of a less interesting decision if you would actually manage to go to the Void Realm or Void Rift. What is it, Void Realm or Rift? The artifacts, you know, you had this cute Easter egg hunt where you would look around every nook and cranny to find these codes, and I think that was a fun concept to explore the maps. I don't think it was as engaging as the quote-unquote puzzles from the first game. I think the puzzles weren't, you know, they weren't difficult or challenging or anything, but I think they were a nice change of pace. But the hunting part isn't really the big problem, it's more so the way you unlock them. You do the same challenge with a slightly different modifier. And of course, some artifacts are far different to unlock. Glass is terrifying to unlock when you're doing a normal run. Suddenly you can just get one shot. Not like you don't get one shot in Risk of Rain 2 anyways, but you know what I mean, it's a bit different. Spite is very much different than just doing a normal playthrough. And Metamorphosis I think was just annoying, but then you have things like Enjima, Honor, and I guess Spirit even, and Soul, it's called Soul in this game, and was just, you know, it didn't really change too much, so it just felt like doing, you know, the same procedure of getting the 3 new keys and then getting the artifact. I just don't think it was, it lost its novelty really fast, and again felt more like padding. Of course the artifacts themselves had a lot more replayability, but you know how it is. It's in general just, it's a feeling of unlocking it is as valuable as actually playing around with the things you've unlocked. And then the 1.0 launch was of course rather mixed across the crowd. People felt they didn't really have enough. It felt rushed for many, and they really had to, the early access model of having to be not only, you know, constantly updating the game because it was rather bare bones at early access release, just was like a shackle around your leg. And they talk about an example with how the boss that was called Grandparent was supposed to be a unique boss for the Sky Meadows, but it got cancelled. And I which, you know, it was a really cool idea, but they said it was also challenging, so, you know, it had to be cut to hit release dates. This is why Sky Meadows doesn't have a unique boss, and he reuses the Magma Worm and weirdly the Solus Probe. I suppose it was the only boss that hadn't been used like as much, so it wouldn't feel too repetitive. It still really clashes harshly with the environment, I must admit. Now, the thing is that this format maybe has made it so their updates felt a bit, you know, they were very bite-sized. You know, maybe you could get 3 or 4 or even a week with friends, but you really quickly saw everything the update had to offer. But it did work. 70,000 concurrent players at 1.0 is an incredible feat for such a game. And it's even developed by, you know, a relatively small crowd with 3 people. Of course, they have outsourced a bit of the content, like the alternative maps for Distant Roost and Titans. What was it called? It's Distant Roost and Titanic Plains, was it? That had these alternative maps, and I think they were made by Ghost Punch. Correct me if I'm wrong. And those maps were incredible. I think the Distant Roost other variant is my second favorite map in the game. The sense of verticality you get and how it just overlaps is incredible. It's a very fun map to play. But the really interesting thing is that they're talking about how they're going to, you know, change things. 1.0 or after 1.0, it's not going to be the same format. We're not going to get like a forecast season 2 type of deal, because they state that this early access format has left them with a lot of problems, and those are that, you know, there's been bugs, and I don't blame them. I hope we shouldn't blame themselves too much for bugs, because there are, again, a very small team. Some things are bound to slip by, though. I do think that the marooning on 1.0 might have been a bit of a sign of rush developers. And also talk about survivors not having, you know, the same number of skill variants. Well, I don't think it's, you know, it's not so important to make everyone have the same number of skill variants. I do think that they had, you know, the branches that would show up before the 1.0. I think, for example, Multi had the branch next to his secondary or his shift ability, and people naturally expected that those would be added in the 1.0 update. And instead of adding them, you know, they removed the branches, and a lot of people were disappointed by it, especially since the skills were so positively received and added a lot of extra nuance to the survivors. They also talk about having a very, very developed mod community, and it doesn't even have official mod support. And I do think the mod community in Risk of Rain 2 is so incredibly impressive, and I feel like Hopo really wanted to, or Hopo Games rather, the whole development team, really wanted to further the modding scene, but they just didn't have the enough resources or time for it. Now, talking about moving forward, they're going to change things. Firstly, they're going to add more people to the Hopo Games team. They're going to hire more people. And I think this is something they should have done a long time ago. Remember, Hopo Games is a 3-people studio. It's Duncan, which I believe is Hopo, Paul the Goat, and Jeff, I believe his name is, which is then Gore. And they have also outsourced development. The console port is being done by a different studio, and Ghost Punch helped them a bit. And now, you know, they're going to have more people. And that's going to be great. That's going to allow them to be more creative. That's going to allow them to broaden their scope. And in general, just really, really excited to, you know, see where Hopo Games with a more manpower can actually take Risk of Rain 2. And a really nice thing is they're going to release one more content update to all platforms. I assume this one is, of course, going to be free. And, you know, they say it's a final thank you to players and also themselves. And I think it's important. The game is their project rather, and they deserve to also be happy with it. And now that they mentioned this is not going to have any sort of, you know, timeline or release date, and since it will look a bit different than the other content updates, I do think this one will be a bit bigger and not really, you know, this small little bite-sized. And of course they do mention that their goal is to complete the internal content they had to cut. You know, we have a lot of cut content in Risk of Rain 2. If you data mine the game, you can find, you know, Bandit has a fully functioning model, Handy as well. Paladin, one of the survivors that was teased as, you know, one of the maybe the mystery survivors you could vote for, is in the game as a placeholder. There's a blue beetle, like a beetle guardian, and you know, there's a lot of cut content in there. Sniper, Enforcer is just a white block, but they say internal content, so this might be things that they had on, you know, their concept, they've written it, and then they had to take it down because they realized they couldn't make it, but now they can. It might not even be things we have seen in the files. I must imagine as a developer it is very disheartening and even frustrating to have a bunch of ideas that you're interested to make and you really want to put them in motion, and then you have to realize halfway through that you have to cut it because you have to meet a set deadline, which I think is a really big shame. So I completely understand that they want, flesh those ideas out, get them out there, but just because it says, internal content, they have to be cut, that doesn't necessarily mean, we're going to get all those files and drivers and items that we have know of in the files. It might just mean, it might be completely different things that only, the Hopo Game Studio knows about. And, as always, they're open to feedback, so, go in their Discord, talk about them feedback, give them feedback and ideas. They always take it. They're very, very open-minded. And of course, they're going to hire more team, a few more members to their studio, and, they don't have job listings yet, but they'll let you know when they're available. And they do have a Hopo Games Twitter that's specifically for, the company or the studio, and not Risk of Rain and their games. And I'm going to link that as well as also the rest of the team's Twitters on screen right now, so you can follow that if you're even interested in joining their team or just want to follow around on the Risk of Rain crew. They're good people. Now, after it's almost 20 minutes, we're finally getting to the real interesting part of this developer thoughts. After this final free content update that we're going to get, they're going to do paid expansions. They're not going to keep doing free content updates. While of course think it would be a nice dream to have to pay for a game once and then just keep getting free content, that's just not an economically sustainable format. And I completely understand this new approach of having to actually pay for the DLCs or the extra content now. Because, they want to keep making the game. And I do think that the funding, now that they actually have to make content that you're going to pay for, is not only going to set a higher standard than the content updates for what is actually in them, it's also going to allow them to be far bigger. They mentioned these are going to be multiple content updates in size, if that means, 2 or 4, I don't know. And they mentioned that it's going to be once or twice a year. Now, if that means, if you get it twice a year, I suppose they're going to be like at top 3 times the size of a content update, which would be a rather hefty amount of content, I must admit. Like, that could almost be 3 survivors, 24, 30 items and equipment combined, and maybe 2 or 3 new maps. I think realistically they will probably cut at least 1 map, because maps take a lot of time to make. And here we see that they're also going to talk about how the expansion will be themed. So, for example, we could have a Void expansion focusing on the Void Rivers, or an Imp expansion where we might even get to the Red Plain and see why the Imps are so terrified of going, back home through their portals whenever they're killed. As a lore nut, I'm of course very excited about all of this, and I want to see this game soar. I want to see this game become better. And I think the game has a quantity issue where it just doesn't really have enough content to compare with a lot of the roguelikes or roguelites rather on the market. When I play a game like Binding of Isaac or Enter the Gungeon, I can safely feel that every run is going to be quite different because of just the sheer amount of items in the game. Of course, Binding of Isaac has had a lot of content updates since then, and Enter the Gungeon has had quite a few. So I think Risk of Rain 2, or I think even Risk of Rain 1, felt that, the items were more different and that you would get a different run. Risk of Rain 2 felt a bit more homogeneous after playing it. So this is basically the best thing I could hope for the future of Risk of Rain 2. And I know, it's paid content and a lot of people aren't happy for that, but on the positive side, they do not want to separate the community. Because of that, they have talked about on Twitter, or Hopo rather has talked about on Twitter, how even if only the host has the DLC, most likely the rest of the players are also going to be joined to play with the content, even if they do not own the DLC. They really do not want to segregate the player base, which I think is really a good move, since in the games their player bases can live or die if you split it. As soon as one DLC becomes a bit more mandatory, then you're going to lose a lot of people. And they talk about, more reasonings is because they're going to hire more people, they need more money to pay these people. So of course it is expected that they're going to need more funds. Completely fair, I think. We should all be a bit more understanding about that. And also they're talking about something which I think have been a bit of a problem with Risk of Rain 2, how you know, a bite-sized update, you know, one of the content updates, it's going to bring a player back for a relatively short amount of time, and given how much time it takes for Risk of Rain team to develop these updates, and then, you know, you don't really get too much back for them. You get maybe a couple sales. I mean, sure, I'm very sure you get a lot of sales out of it, but I imagine that in the end it just doesn't really have that same oomph, especially after like the 4th or 5th. The first content update, for sure, because it's the first, that's exciting, and the final one, because that's the launch into 1.0, people have a lot of expectations for that. They even talk about how, you know, the Bice's update, you know, 1 new survivor, 8 new items, and a map. Let's not undersell it now. You know, it's not that exciting to keep you interested for so long. I still think that the expansions are going to make it be better for even veteran players who played for a long time. And, you know, they talk about how there's other games in the market, and you're going to have to talk about, you know, you're going to have to compete for time. When they make new expansions, they have to market what you should play Risk of Rain 2, and not all these hundreds of other games that have also released, that are also getting updates. And I think it's very fair that you interest more people with a bigger update, with more content, rather than, you know, this small little update. They want your feedback, of course, and I do think before you go and talk about that, oh, you're just being a greedy studio and want more money, I think you should just take a minute to realize that this is the only really good solution if you wanted to keep more quality content Risk of Rain 2 in the future. I think Risk of Rain 2 would not really been in the best place if everything just ended after 1.0. Oh yeah, and of course they mentioned that quality of life, bug fixes, balance changes, all that, you know, more technical stuff is going to be free patches to the base game, so you don't have to buy a expansion to fix a bug. It's just, you know, standard procedure, but it's always good to know that we don't have to worry about that. Finally, they move on to talk a bit about modding, and the modding community in Risk of Rain 2 has been incredibly inspiring to see. I didn't really get too much into, you know, the item and character mods, because I wanted to get through the whole game, you know, at 1.0 before, so I could more easily appreciate the modded content. But I always use those aesthetic mods like the photo mode and first person view, so I could get a better viewing experience for all of you. But really, I must admit that the modding community seeing it all has been impressive. Seeing they first had, you know, a big hurdle of which modding, not really engine, which modding like API, I think it is, that they wanted to use, and there was some conflict about which one was the best, and, you know, people who developed their APIs want to push them forward, but eventually 1.1 it's become standardized, and modding has just grown really fast. Some mods are, you know, repurposed cut content, like the Bandit Revived or Handy Revived kind of mods, and also we have you know, completely original survivors. I think there's this Wisp Mage, can't remember their name. There was also Sniper, but a bit more reimagined to fit in the 3D environment. All very impressive mods for sure. And then, you know, they talk about how that they're going to push for official modding support. They don't know the exact shape of that yet, and since modding is a very complex feature, and, you know, especially with expansions, there's always, you know, this risk that if you let modding become too open source, people can, you know, just rip the expansions or share them around, and, you know, piracy is always going to be a problem, but you don't want to make it any easier. Risk of Rain 2 always had this weird relationship with modding, because there was a very common practice to mod, you know, change the files so we'd get 999 lunar coins. I never did that. I enjoyed the slow gain of them, and I rarely use lunars. I don't think they're that interesting to really worth using every run, but of course I did a couple runs with them. I think they're fun enough. So I had always enough lunar coins, but some people, you know, bought every lunar pod, went to the bazaar every time, and of course they would run dry very fast. But regardless, I do think it is very good to push for modding. It is what's going to allow the game to live on longer, and while Hopo Games is making those official expansions, in the downtime, modders can release their content, and that's going to, you know, satisfy all of the crowd, so that they can keep having their fun and the wait feels shorter. I do think they should probably maybe push for the modding support a bit more heavier before they develop the expansions and all that. I think maybe that would be a bit better, but I'm not, you know, a professional, I'm just a random person on the World Wide Web talking about my opinion. Of course, as you probably see, this is unscripted and very rambly and just speaking my thoughts out loud. But yeah, I think this is a great idea, and I really can't wait to see the modding develop further. It's going to be very great. Now they also talk about Stadia and Thunder Grove. There was a new map, and from the looks of it, you know, it has high trees. I at first kind of was wondering if this was a jungly type map, you know, with more foliage and all that. And I really think it would be nice having a bit more vibrant map. Well, Risk of Rain 1 is, you know, a more... Risk of Rain was more moody, atmospheric. The pixel art really did sell that. And there was a lot of, you know, different colors. Sometimes you would go through the dark, you know... what was it called? Desolate Forest. Dried River, I think. It was something like Dried Lake. You know, there was, you know, some darker maps that were more gloomy, and then you would go to the really vibrant Temple of the Elders, and then the hive map, like with the pink slime. You know, it was suddenly, you know, pink, very, very different, very not clashing, very vibrant color palettes as well. Risk of Rain 1 was not an uninteresting game to look at. Of course, it helped with all those particle effects from your striver when you got beefed up with all the items. But I do think that Risk of Rain 2 sometimes feels a bit samey. It's, you know, it can have a lot of fog to make for atmosphere, and eventually that can just make it feel a bit flat. So I would really like some bit more vibrant map. I do think there's a lot of blue in Risk of Rain 2. You know, it's giving Battlefield 4 a bit of a run for its money at times, but I do think this map could probably be very nice. I know another map is always good. And I should of course talk about the Stadia part of it. You know, you gotta think about the poor people who bought a Stadia, who invested in such a, you know, console that in general just not a good business practice or, you know, ethical in a way, because, you know, it takes less and less control from the consumer and just makes everything digital so they could control every nook and cranny of it. But seeing, you know, people thought that this was going to be a Stadia exclusive map and you have to buy the Stadia, and people were upset, of course. However, they're talking about that this is going to be more so a bonus that's you can get in Stadia first, and then they're going to get this map to more fans as soon as they can. They probably, I wouldn't surprise this was Gearbox choosing to have something to like sweeten the deal with Stadia. I'm sure this was probably beneficial for the studio, and I think we should be happy that they're getting deals like this. It is good. It is a good sign. And don't worry, we're all going to get this map eventually. I wouldn't be surprised that this is either going to, I think this is going to come a bit earlier than the massive content update that they're talking about, or the final free content update rather. I don't know its size. But rest assured, you're going to play Thunder Grove. Don't get your knackers in a twist, okay? It's going to be fine, people. And of course they're going to talk, the Thunder Grove is designed by Ghost Punch. And Ghost Punch designed those alternatives to the first stages, and those are great, so I have no doubts that Thunder Grove is going to be a very fun map as well. So yeah, hats off to Ghost Punch as well. I'm going to put their social medias right here if they do have it. Anyways, that is about it. That's what they have talked about, and you know, they're all happy. They're happy with how they have done things. And this final development thoughts is not final development thoughts, but this one is, you know, to talk about how it's going. I hope that it's insightful and that you are all also, you know, looking forward to the way that Risk of Rain 2 is going to be. And you know, as final time, they really want you to share their feedback and ideas. It's really nice. I think a lot of developers say this, but don't really mean it. But with Hopo, it feels like they really take what you say at heart. I think that's very impressive. And as a final bonus, we get the early access golem, but now he's enjoying a nice relaxing break after, you know, being the construction golem for so long. I suppose even he got his closure, after all. I as well owe a lot to Hope of Games and Risk of Rain 2. It has given me a platform where a lot of people come to hear me talk about topics, which I always think I'm very thankful that they even have such a platform. It feels, it's very humbling, as always, to have people come to your content or like visit your channel to spend some of their valuable time on your content. So thank you all for that. And a big thank you to Hopo Games for developing such a fantastic and interesting game. I might be harsh on Hopo a lot of the time and criticize them, but that's just because I think this is one of the better games out there, and one of the most intriguing worlds and compelling gameplay loops, and I just want to see it really unveil its true potential and soar as high as it can. If I wanted to go higher than Icarus, because I don't think its wings will melt off. So I do hope this ramble, or this first episode of maybe it's even the only episode of Coco Talks, was enjoyable to all of you. So thank you all for listening, and of course, as always, have a cozy evening. All these cool ideas that you made. But now the fan is acting up. Okay, fan, don't have to do this anymore. Oh, there's another car.